this evening. Cool. So today I'm going to be talking about making an app in half an hour using SwiftUI. So once you get that up. So SwiftUI came out about 3 or 4 months ago at the start of June at Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference. And it's basically a new way to create user interfaces in iOS apps without doing it the traditional way. So the way you'd used to do it in Swift or with Objective-C is you can either use the interface builder in Xcode, which generates basically a big XML file, which is really hard to keep track of and see your changes over, Git history and stuff like that. Or the other way is to do it programmatically. So they have this constraint-based way of laying out items on the page or objects on the page, or the view. So if you want to put some text at the top, you basically got to snap it to the top of the device and snap it to the left and right, and you end up with 4 or 5 lines basically defining where your text is in the view in an iOS app. So SwiftUI has come out and basically got rid of all that. And so let's have a look at how it goes. Oh, and let's start with a bit about me. I'm Sam. That's my cool Twitter handle, SamuAmy10. It's obviously I made it when I was 10 and haven't changed it, but I should probably do that. And I work at Telstra Purple, which used to be Redify about 2 months ago. But anyway, now we're this big company. Cool. So what do you need to get started? So you need access to a Mac with Xcode 11. So Xcode 11 came out with Mac OS Catalina a couple of weeks ago. It's been in beta for about 2 or 3 months. And so you need that, and then if you want to test it, you can either run it on your Mac in the simulator, in like an iPhone or iPad simulator, or if you want to run it on an actual device, obviously you need an iPhone or an iPad. It's not won't work on Android phones. Just some words of caution or warning, basically. This is a very new language, and so there's a lot of errors that you get that don't really make sense and don't really help you troubleshoot what actually your problem is. And when you Google things and stuff on Stack Overflow, there's not that many resources available yet because it hasn't been out for that long. So, you look up generic parameter data could not be inferred and there's no, nothing about it. So you've kind of got to work out yourself what the error is. Cool. So what's the problem we're going to solve? We're making an app in 30 minutes. So I have this problem every morning where I'm on the train and I want to, so I've got to change at Flinders Street to get to Southern Cross to get to work. And I have this problem where I don't know what the next train to Southern Cross is going to be. So you can see here, I'm sitting on a train. I don't know what platform to go to. These people behind me aren't very helpful. So I get off the train. All these other people don't know where to go. I've got to work at, what platform do we go to get to Southern Cross? I asked these people at the desk. They couldn't really give me a good answer. The screens, they're really complicated. Don't know what's going on there. Even out the front, these clocks, they tell you what platform to go to, but which ones go to Southern Cross? Even if you have a look, there's a guy on the left there, he doesn't know where to go either. So, I don't know, it's a pretty complicated problem. So what's the solution? Well, obviously, being technology people here, it's create an app. So I did this really quick mock-up just before in Keynote of what we're going to end up doing. But basically, we've got this app, which I've excitedly called Next Trains, and then we've got 3 ways of sorting. So we can sort by stations, by platforms, or by time. And then that will basically show you on the left, it'll show you what the next station is, and then show you what platform to go to and when the train's leaving. So it's a pretty simple concept. These are all the things we're going to cover, but let's go ahead and jump into Xcode. And wish me luck, because this is just live everything, and so chances are probably something won't go right. But anyway, let's try it. So this is SwiftUI. Firstly, I just want to check, can everyone see the code on the left, or do I need to make it bigger? Bigger? All right, that's pretty unanimous. Is that big enough? Keep going? Just keep yelling at me if I need to keep going. No? Cool, great. Cool. So when you create a new SwiftUI project, it essentially gives you this content view, which is the file that we're in now. And so you create the new project, and I would have created it here, but I had to add some extra libraries with Google Firebase. So that's just the data source that we're getting the public transport information from. That's something I did out of this. And, we don't really need to look at that. Anyway, so this is what it creates. And so we've got this content view, and then we've basically got this variable body. And so anything in body is what's going to be rendered. And so we'll go ahead and add some text. So in this case, hello world. Save that, and that'll get rid of all the errors. And then you get this cool new thing on the right-hand side. So this is a live preview that's actually, it's really rendering. So it's not like a simulation or anything. This is actually what the SwiftUI code will come out and show you. So this is as opposed to previously doing it, which is where you have to create your app, hit play, wait for the simulator to start and see it, see it like in the simulator here. Instead, you can see it on the right, which is a good feature of SwiftUI. So we've done hello world, and let's add some styling to it. So for example, let's change the font to something bigger. So maybe a large title. And we can add a background to all that too. So you can't do the background on the actual text. You've got to put everything in a group. So I can go ahead and do that. And we can add a background and we can make it black, for example. And then when this re-renders, we'll see we can't see the text. So maybe let's add some color to that so we can actually see it, color white. And it's pretty squished in the box there. So let's add some padding as well to expand that out. As you can see, it's pretty easy to style that element. And yeah, so that's that. So let's move on to stacks. And so the way you align items on the screen using SwiftUI is all through stacks. So let's just flick forward to the next bit of code. And so the idea of stacks is you have a vertical stack and a horizontal stack. So a vertical stack, when you put 5 items in the vertical stack, it'll put them on top of each other. When you put 5 items in a horizontal stack, they'll go next to each other. So using a combination of vertical stacks and horizontal stacks, you can basically create your layout. So let's do that now. So we saw the what I created just before with the that mockup. So let's create that header now and skip forward actually to the right one. So we can see I've got next trains, and let's get rid of the padding because we don't need that, and let's leave the color. Let's get rid of the black. So we've got our title there. Let's put all this in a vertical stack. So that's just references V stack, and we can make a horizontal stack, and then let's put our things in the horizontal stack. So that's those 3 buttons we want to use to sort. So to work out what elements you can put in, you can either just start typing if you already know, or you can hit this plus up the top here, and this gives you a list of all the different views and elements that you can put into your code. So I just want to do a button, so let's just drag that right in. And this button is going to be, what was the first one we just sort of by? Stations. And then we can either copy and paste it, or you can drag that in again. And the other cool thing is if you hit this plus up here and drag the button in, you can actually position it in the UI builder. And as I drop this here, you can see it'll add the code, but that didn't add in the right spot, so that was wrong. But anyway, you can basically drop it in the view as well if you prefer to do it more visually. So we've got stations, we've got platforms, and we've got time, are the 3 different things we want to sort by. We can see the preview here, the buttons are blue, so I want to change them to be black. So what I can do is on their text, add a color, foreground color, and I'm going to set it to be a primary color. Primary color essentially means black if we're in light mode or white if we're in dark mode. So it dynamically adjusts based on what setting the iPhone is in. So that's another good feature of SwiftUI, is it responds to those system-wide themes. So we'll do that on all of them. And the other thing I want to do is split the buttons so they're not all together like that. So at the moment they're all bunched up in the middle, and I want to spread them out. So what we can do is add this element, this view called spacer. And if we put that in between each of them, it'll spread them out and send them to the side. And I get this cannot preview in this file, but if you just hit try again, it always works. So I don't know why that happens. And then now you can see stations and time are both squished into the edge of the device, which looks kind of funny. So let's add some padding to that. Padding kind of works like CSS margins, not CSS padding if you've used CSS before. And it's a lowercase p. And save that, and there we go. That's basically our header view. So I've got all this code in my content view here. So we've got all this stuff, and it's getting pretty long, and you can imagine it gets longer and longer as we go along. So let's split it into a subview. So I'll go ahead and create them, and we want to create 2 of them. We want to create a header view, which will have this data, and then we'll create a departure view, which will list out each of those train departures that we're looking at in that mockup. So let's create the first one, header view. And we'll create another one as well called SwiftUI view, called departure view. And now that we've created them, let's get our code from the content view, copy all that out, put it into our header view. And then let's put the header view into the content view. So just call that header view, save that, and that will now appear in the content view, which is our first page when you open the application. The other thing I want to do is create that departure view as well. So there you go. There's an example of what it's going to look like. Spoiler alert. But let's put that all in a horizontal stack to start off with. And we want to have the station name on the left side, and then we want to have the departure time and the platform on the right. So let's do that. We've got Southern Cross. And then because on the right-hand side, we've got 2 items on top of each other, we want to create a horizontal stack and put in the text. So it's platform 10, for example. And then that leaves in 10 minutes. So I've got all that, and you can see it's all squished up together, and looks like I need a vertical stack, not a horizontal stack. And I want to spread them apart. So once again, we use a spacer. And those items are now stuck to the edges. So let's add some padding to both the outer items. Cool. And so we've created that, and that's what our departure view is going to look like. The last thing I want to add is a background. So I want to have different backgrounds for each station so you can easily tell what's what. Let's set that to be red. And looks like we need the text to be white so we can actually see it. So let's do foreground color dot primary. Actually, let's do just dot white. It's always going to be a red background. Save that. Try again. There we go. It's rocked up. So that's that. And then now we can just put those departure views into our content view. Just go ahead and add them in. You can't have multiple top level elements. So we just need to kind of group everything in the one group. You can't have more than one view at the top level of another view. And so we can do something like this. Then if I run this application in the simulator, and this is always the part that takes extra long, so I'm just going to keep talking here just to pad while we wait for this to build. And here we go. And there you go. You can see we've got the 3 buttons there, which you can click. And they don't do anything yet. And then those 2 departures that we just added. So let's go ahead and populate that with some data. And let's go forward to this. And discard our changes. Cool. So I've added this new folder here called data. And so what data has is the data that I want to use. So our first one is departure. This is a model. And so it just has, for each departure, we've got a date time. So when that train's leaving, what platform it's leaving from, how many minutes to a departure, what the station name is, and finally a gradient. We'll use this later to actually give the background a color, depending on what station it is. And then we've got this departure service. So if you've ever done something with dependency injection or inversion of control, this is a similar concept where you inject it kind of in startup. But if you haven't used it before, it's just essentially this, it's a class which this has this departures method or departures variable, which is just a list of departures. And then we've got this function here we can call fetch. And what that does is, before when I was talking about Firebase, it just hits this Firebase database and populates that departures with all the different departures that's happening. How good's the knocking over there? It's great. Anyway, cool. So we got that. And now what we want to do is we've created our departure service. We want to inject that and make it available to all the different views. So if you've ever written an app before in iOS, you'd be familiar with the concept of app delegate. So this is different methods that run when the app launches or when you reopen the app. We've also got this concept of scene delegate, which has come in SwiftUI. We can see we've got one here, which this whole method essentially just sets up the scene or the SwiftUI view when we start. So we've got let content view equals content view. So we're setting up a new content view here. And then what we're doing is setting the initial view controller that we see to be the content view. What we want to do is add that departure service to our content view so we have access to it and we can get that data. Let's go ahead and do that. So let departures service equals departures service. And then let's add that as an environment object to our content view. So we can just pass that in like this. And now in our content view, we'll have access to that departure service. And so what's there here? And let's just go and read my notes here. And let's come back to that. And in our content view, what we want to do is get access to that. So we basically set up a variable. So var departures service is of type departures service. And I remember what I did wrong, so let's go back to that. But to access it, we just do environment object. And then because we've passed that in, now we have access to that in this file. The one thing I missed, which I meant to talk about before, was what we need to do is every time this departures field is updated, we want to re-render the view. So we want to trigger the view to update with the new data. So what we can do is call this an observable object or make this an observable object. And then what we do is on the fields that we want the view to update on, we add this published wrapper to it. So now every time departures updates and every time this fetch function is called, and you can see it appends to departures here, every time that happens, it'll re-render the view. So we can see the updates. So now that we've done that, that should work. Maybe let's just hit run or resume and make it build. And there we go, it succeeded. And then now we have access to that departure service in our content view. So we've injected that through. So then now what we want to do is do a loop. So for each for each. And we want to do departures service and then access that variable. So departures service dot departures. And then we just get our departure in, and then here's where we actually do the loop. So just do departure view. And so now what that will do is for each departure that we get, it'll just create a new departure view, and we'll move on to actually populating that. So the first thing we want to do is, when we looked at departure service before, there was this fetch function. That fetch function isn't currently called, so at the moment, departures is just an empty object. Or an empty array. So what we want to do is call that fetch function. We want to do that when this view is first loaded. So I've got the concept of view lifecycle events. So if we hit dot and type on, you can see all the different view lifecycle events. The one we're focusing on is on appear, but you've got a lot of other ones if you need to clean up afterwards on disappear or do something else. We can do on appear, and then we want to perform something, perform, and then let me just copy in the function that we actually want to perform, which is this one. So essentially what this is doing, which I'll show you, is it's calling that fetch function that we saw just before, so it populates that departures array, and then it also hits this URL. So this URL is just a Google Cloud function that I created to essentially repopulate and rehydrate that data. So it hits the PTV API from the government and like puts all that data into Firebase, but that's kind of beyond the scope of this talk. So now that we've done perform, we can just do load data. And then every time this group is created or appears, it'll call this load data function and fill in that departures. So that's great. And let me just run that and see what happens. No, we don't do that. Cool. Builds are happening fairly quick, which is exciting. And we can see we've got a whole bunch of departures and they fall off the screen, and obviously I haven't passed in the real data yet. So it's just that, template that I came up before with just Southern Cross and Platform 10. So it looks like we need to add a scroll view here so we can actually, because I can't scroll at the moment and everything's falling off the screen. So let's go ahead and do that. And put all these in there. And now that will scroll. So let's fill in the departures view. So the first thing that we want to do is set up, we want to set up input binding is what it's called. So input binding is a way to link data between a child and a parent. So we've got content view here, and within content view, we've got departure view. So departure view is the child, content view is the parent. So we're going to departure view here, and we want to link that to the parent view. So every time the parent view updates departures, we want that to be linked to the child. So what we can do is actually, sorry, let's scratch that part. I'll come back to bindings in 1 second, but first let's just set up our departure. So we've got our departure ready here, and then within our text, let's just get the actual values. So we've got departure dot station name, and then platform 10. So let's fill in the platform name, departure dot platform, and finally how many minutes till the train departs. So this is for each train departure at Flinders Street, and this is minutes till departure. And finally, we've got that gradient that I was talking about before, which I want to use as the background. So gradient. We're getting an error here, missing argument for parameter departure in call. So this preview provider is essentially the function that sets up this preview on the right-hand side here. And so we need to give it kind of some fake data, because this departure view in the parent, in content view, will pass in the departure. But as it sits standalone here, it doesn't have a departure. And so it's looking for this departure and doesn't have any information when it's trying to preview it on the right here. So what we can do is just basically add in some fake or mock data so we can actually see what it looks like in here. And I've already just created that, so let's copy that in. This is just a sample departure so we can see how it looks. Save that. And then I've just got one other error in content view. It's saying it doesn't have the departure argument. So because we're doing a loop here, we've got each departure. Let's just pass in departure here. Save that. And if we hit play, in theory, we get all our departures. So there you go. You can see we've got Southern Cross, platform 9 in 2 minutes. And then if we go all the way down, we've got Richmond as well. So the next train from Flinders Street to Richmond is platform 6 in 1 minute. So that's pretty cool, but our buttons up here aren't yet working. So let's work out how we can actually sort these. So we'll stop that. What we need to do, this is where we use bindings. So the idea of bindings, like I said before, is to link a parent view to a child view. And so in our header view, where we've actually got those buttons, if we have a look at header view and resume the updating. So those buttons, every time we click one of those buttons, we want something to happen. So So let's go ahead and set up this binding, and let's call it it's variable, and it's sorted by, and let's have it as a string. So what we want to do is when we click on one of these buttons, we want to update this sorted by variable. And so in here we can do that, this dot sorted by equals stations, this dot sorted by equals platforms, and finally this dot sorted by equals time. So we've set that up now, and let's go back into our content view. Sorry, it's not this, it's self. There you go, JavaScript coming through. Cool. And so let's go back to our content view, and we've got our header view. We're not passing in anything at the moment, so that'll probably error in a second. And so what we want to do is in our header view, if we update sorted by just on the header view, the content view has no idea that header view's changed. So we need some way to let the parent, from header view, we need to let content view know that sorted by type has changed, so it knows to re-render and resort all those departures. So what we can do is in content view, we can set up another variable, so call sorted by, and that's of type string. And then I'm going to introduce another concept too, and this is the last one of these. It's called state. So every time state updates, it's kind of like environment object. Every time state updates, it will re-render that view and any views that use that. So in this case, it's just this view. And now what we want to do is pass in sorted by to header view. And so what header view can do is update the state from the child. So I'll show you how that's done. If we go sorted by, and as you can see by the method, by the parameter description there, it's got it's a string of type, a binding of type string. And so what we want to do is we've got the sorted by here, and because this is a type state, it gives us this binding version of the state with, if you put the $sign in front. So now what this means is we're passing in this sorted by variable, and let's give it a default value, for example, stations. What it's doing is passing in this, like a reference to this variable to departure view. So if you didn't have that binding, it would just pass a copy. And so if you updated, stations or platforms or whatever, it wouldn't reflect through to the parent and then wouldn't resort your departures. So what you need to do is pass it in as a binding. So does that make sense? Cool. All right. One yes, that's good. Awesome. So now that we've done that, we are pretty much done. So let's go ahead and just skip through to the done commit, because I can see an error there. And, actually, let's just go back one more. Oh, sorry. That one. So we've set our sorted by. Our sorted by is updating every time we click one of those buttons. The final thing we need to do is actually do the sorting. So I'm going to copy and paste some other code in here and then explain it, just because there's a little bit going on. And so let's replace here. And so what's happening is every time that state changes, which isn't there. So every time that state changes, this view is going to re-render. And so then as we go through this view rendering, it checks is sorted by stations. If it's sorted by stations, what we're going to do is get each of the stations it can possibly be, so Southern Cross, Richmond or Parliament. And then you can see it's still that same loop that we had before, but we're adding this extra filter thing to it. What we're saying is we're filtering only items where the station name equals to Southern Cross, and then we're just getting the first three, prefix 3. And then we're just rendering them out like we did before. Same thing for Richmond, same thing for Parliament. Otherwise, if sorted by is platforms, then we're doing this sorted thing here. So we've got our same departures, and then we're doing sorted by the platform. And then finally, we're also doing a filter. So we're getting rid of any departures that are beyond the next 20 minutes because they're probably not going to be relevant. Finally, if the last one is time, if we want to sort by time, it's the same thing, but instead of sorting by platforms, we're sorting by minutes till departure. So we want the most, the shortest minutes to departure. Awesome. So now that we've done all that, let's now jump through to the done commit and run that. This preview on the right here stops every now and then, but you can just hit resume to start it. This is kind of the flakiest part, I think, of this is the preview on the right, but I'm sure it'll get better. And let's wait for this to build. Another cool thing is with SwiftUI, you can build to Mac. So as opposed to just targeting iOS and iPads, you can also build Mac apps with it too. Anyway, awesome. There we go. So we've got our stations. We've got 3 from Southern Cross, 3 from Richmond. Obviously, there's no departures to Parliament at this time. We can go ahead and click platforms and see we have platform list, so platform 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or we can look by time. So, 0 minutes, 1 minute, 3 minutes. So yeah, that's basically creating the app. So what we covered, we did hello world at the start, then we added some styles, so making that text larger, adding that background, and we worked with stacks. So that was, doing a vertical stack and putting items, on top of each other, or horizontal stacks, which is how you lay out items horizontally, and you can combine them together to create kind of complex layouts. Then we created some subviews to split our code into different views, so we weren't all in the one, in the one file, and so we could repeat them. We used observable object and publish. So that was when in departures service, we had that list of departures and we wanted the view to re-render when the departures list updated. So we used observable objects on that class and then published on the particular attribute that we wanted to update with. We had a quick look at the app structure. So C and delegate, and then using that environment global to inject the, that service so we could have access to that data everywhere. We looked at some view lifecycle event, or one view lifecycle event, which is that on appear. So we could trigger a function when the, when that view loaded. We added an input binding, so that was on the sorted by attribute. We wanted to pass that sorted by variable from the parent, the content view, through to header view, and allow header view to update that sorted by and have that go through to the parent. Finally, we use state. So state was that every time the state is updated, it regenerates the view. And so we use state also on that sorted by variable. And so every time sorted by was updated in the header view, that went up through to the content view. And then because it was updated and we marked it as a state, the content view knew to re-render because the state changed. And that's what enabled our sorting. So that's basically it. You can jump onto GitHub if you want to download that yourself, and it should run given that you have the Firebase thing. You need like a Firebase key, which you can just download if you set up a Firebase account. That should run and you can see what's done, and hopefully that gave you a quick introduction to SwiftUI.